Hey everyone, welcome to our next session of the 30-minute quick takes. Today we are going to take a dive into working with managed metadata. So there's a few common issues that we typically come across here when migrations involve lists and documents that contain some managed metadata fields, and we want to migrate those over. So what we want to look at today is looking at the options for managed metadata and sort of understanding and explaining how those options interact and work. SharePoint connections, basically we can only copy the managed metadata from the local connection or the Metalogix extensions web service, and the target we can use either the local, the Metalogix web service, or the client-side object model to go to the SharePoint Online environment. So as you can see there, we cannot migrate managed metadata from a database connection or the SharePoint native web service. And then we'll look at a couple of common issues. One is related to the GUIDs. So the terms come in a label GUID pair, and we can have issues depending on the choices you make in the migration. And the other one are common permissions issues. So let's get out and we'll take a look at the environment. So in this particular demo, I'm showing a migration from SharePoint 2010 to SharePoint 2013. So my 2010 environment has a simple library which has a managed metadata field. And what I can show you and what we'll talk about are the actual options first. So under my site job configuration, under the managed metadata options, we have these options here. So the resolve managed metadata by name and hierarchy, that means what we will do as opposed to what we used to do going back a few versions. When we initially came out with this functionality, we would actually copy the entire label GUID pair and have to add that into the target environment. In a lot of cases, there were labels, the same label on the target, but a different GUID. And that caused a lot of issues during the migrations. And so we came up with this new option, resolving it by name and hierarchy, meaning when we look at the actual term store, we have the label here and the GUID identifying the term in the actual term store database, and then we have the hierarchy. So we have, of course, the term, we have the term set, and we have a group, and we have the actual term store itself. So what we do now is when we migrate the taxonomy, we look at the source hierarchy and the target hierarchy, and if the object matches, then we can then migrate that based on this copy referenced managed metadata setting. So this is really important, and it links to this one. So this option here tells the tool to actually copy the term itself. So copy the underlying managed metadata and add it to the term store on the target. Now, if we don't select this option, what we'll do is we look at the source term store, we find the term, and then we look at the target term store and we look for the same identical term and GUID. Now, if those both match, then we will use the target. But if it doesn't match, then we will throw a warning, and I'll show you that in one of the jobs that I've run down here. So I've run a few jobs so that we don't take up a lot of time in actual migration. The third option applies only if you have multiple term stores on your target. So typically, most environments you're going from one farm to another, and from what I've seen, most most clients will have just a managed metadata service application created, and they're the same name. And in that case, you don't really have to apply a mapping. In my case, because we've added so many for different testing purposes, I do need to go in and say, okay, I want to copy all of my managed metadata from the source term store, which of course in this case is the managed metadata service, and I want to map it to my managed metadata service 2013. And that's where I want to add all of my new terms. Now, if you have a brand new farm and you've just set up the service application, then you definitely want to choose the option to copy the reference managed metadata, and we will move it all over during the migration. And I'll just show you in the log itself what you will see on a successful migration. So we create the site and we resolve the taxonomy term stores. And here, here we go. This is the most important one. If you have verbose logging on, we see that this is where we have actually migrated. We found all of the actual referenced terms. So when we copy a site and we copy reference managed metadata, we only copy whatever is referenced in that site collection. We don't copy the entire term store. So what you'll see in this log item is exactly what we've copied. So initial copy, I found that we had one group and one term set and added 5 terms. Okay. So what if we look actually at my source environment, so basically what I have is just a product managed metadata field with a couple of entries. So what it did was it matched the name and it found the hierarchy, and it basically added the same hierarchy in the, so let me just flip over, and what it did, oh, nice, thank you. So what it did was it copied my terms and it copied the term set and copied the group, so it maintained the exact hierarchy on the target. Now, one of the common things is after you migrate your site collection and it's migrated all the taxonomy, you would think that you could then go ahead and copy maybe a list over, and let me just show you the options on this job. Maybe you could just copy and resolve the managed metadata by name and hierarchy without doing the copy reference managed metadata option. So what that's done, as I mentioned, is it's looking for the matching term. Oh, sorry about that. So it's actually looking for the matching term on the target, and what it's expecting, if I just if I just map by name and hierarchy, but I don't copy the reference managed metadata, it expects that the terms match and are consistent with the GUID and the label. So it gave a warning, and this is the warning that you typically see in this case, is that the term GUID could not be found. So what it does is it copies the document but basically just skips that field, and it does not update the managed metadata. So in order to resolve that, what you do want to do is even copying a list within copying a list or anything within a site collection maybe that you've already done or that you've already copied the managed metadata over, you still want to always choose copy reference managed metadata. The only time that you might be able to think of here where you want to just remove this option. This does add a little bit of overhead to the job, because it will search and it will reference all the managed metadata, and then it'll see if it exists on the target, and if it doesn't, it will copy it. And if it does exist, it won't. It'll skip. But if you're within the same farm and everything's using the same term store, then definitely you just leave that unchecked, but still resolved by name and hierarchy. That will match the terms because the GUIDs and labels in GUIDs exist, and they match. Another case is if you've taken the entire managed metadata, the service application content database, and attached it to the target farm and created and attached it to your service application. Now the label, GUID pairs, and the hierarchy should all match. And so again, when you're copying content, site collections, lists, sites, you should not need to choose this option. So basically what you want to think of is if there are differences with the underlying GUIDs, then always choose this option to copy the reference managed metadata. And the other common issue that we do see is this one here. And it's pretty, straightforward. The current user has insufficient permissions to perform the operation. What this means is that the user does not have the administrative access to the term store itself. Now this copy, what I used as a connection was this one, the Metalogix XP test user account. And if I look over at the target, I can see within the term store administrators that this account does not exist. So I would need to add this user and now I could basically go back and recopy. Let me make sure that's the right one. I could do the recopy on this now, and that should resolve that issue. Now, it's a very common issue. Both source and target, the connecting account on source and target need to be term store administrators to that particular term store. So now it's successfully done that part of the job. And this is the part where it does, when we're copying reference managed metadata, it takes up a little more time. So it's a little more of a performance hit when copying the reference managed metadata. So I got a question here actually already. Is there a way to copy all the metadata over whether or not the term was used? And the answer to that is definitely yes. And what you do is basically make a connection, either a web app or a farm connection. So I'll make a farm connection to my source here. And that's actually the other aspect of term store copying. We can copy the entire term store in one shot. Hopefully the connections don't take too long here. So if I right-click on my web app or farm connection, I have the option Copy Farm Managed Metadata. And then all I have to do is right-click on my target farm and paste the Managed Metadata term stores. So I still have that same option and resolve by name and hierarchy. And again, the mapping. Of course, we don't need the copy reference managed metadata because we're copying the entire term store. So that will in effect copy that entire the entire term store, all the groups and all the term sets over in one shot. So the question is, are these options available in all versions of Content Matrix? And just give me 1 sec. I will just double check. Yeah, so it does look like this. These options, the Managed Metadata options, are available in all the different versions of Content Matrix. I.e., I think the question is related to whether it's available in the Express version, or is the question whether it's available in the different ECM products. There are variations of Managed Metadata, like File Share Edition. We can tag documents with Managed Metadata, but it is also available in the Express version. So there's another question, whether the option is available from 2007 to 2013 migration. Well, there's kind of a really cool option. Now, 2007 didn't have anything, didn't have Managed Metadata per se, like 2010. But the cool thing that that Content Matrix can do is it can convert fields to Managed Metadata. So let me just quickly kind of show that option. I didn't have that really set up to demonstrate, but if we did do sort of like a copy and list from 2007 to 2010, under Managed Metadata options, I have this option to transform the specified columns to Managed Metadata columns. So this is really cool, because now we can configure, so we can say, right, any column, so my text, and I'm just gonna, I don't know if that column has a text, but the display name, maybe, equals, so I used to have a field called product, right? And what I can do is I can point to my my product. So I can point to my product and basically convert this product field that may have been a text field. I can convert that into a taxonomy field in the list itself, and it will then add whatever values were in this column. It will add it to that term set on the target. The term anchor here, in case you're wondering, is cases where you have created some subterms, say, underneath. So perhaps I have a term here, and now I create terms underneath that. So this control point here, for instance, becomes a term anchor. So what you can also do with this, you can actually use this to map to existing columns and content types that you've already created on the target. Now that gets into a little more of advanced configuration. I think I actually have a knowledge base article that outlines how to actually do that. But that's how we can basically map 2007 content over to 2010 or 2013 Managed Metadata fields. So we have another question here. If we have two term groups with the same name, then some conflict will occur or not. So if the term group exists on the source, and it's actually exactly the same hierarchy as the target, so I guess you have the term store and then you have the group. So we would, when copying reference managed metadata, we would use that group and add the term sets under that group. So if you have created groups with the same name but have different purposes, then you may want to look at that, or consider, either changing some names, or just looking at whether it's going to work if the term sets from the source get added to this existing term group on the target. I think I had another question that is similar. What happens if the target term store has a group or a term set that is in the source but are different terms? So that so we try to we try to copy these with the exact same hierarchy, right? So it is true you could end up using, if we find that we have a term set and a group and the hierarchy is identical between source and target, then you may actually want to think about, when you do the copy, right? And this is, I don't see a lot of cases of that actually occurring. But if you do uncheck this option, right, it will still copy by label GUID pair. So you could avoid conflicts possibly by removing this option. It's probably still best to always use that resolve by name and hierarchy option. And we have another question here. So when moving from 2007 to 2010, they received the insufficient permission error. Any thoughts why we would need term store admin permissions? Okay, that's a really good question, because that's something new in 7.1. And the reason why you kind of hit that issue is because of the use of enterprise keywords in 2010 or 2013. Previously, when we were copying over content, copying a site, and I can't change it right now to kind of demo that, but we need to access the term store on the target in order to, like I said, configure enterprise keywords fields properly. So they did make that change in the 7.1 version. So if you do see that, you would need to add your migrating account as the term store administrator as well, and that would overcome that particular issue. Let's see if now if I open this. So you see that enterprise metadata and keyword settings. So it's these settings here that the change was made in order to preserve proper linkage when creating the new site. So that's basically the reason that you started getting that particular error. Yeah. Are there any other questions? We still have a few minutes left. What we could do is we could take that actual time to take a look at that particular conversion to managed metadata. So hopefully my custom list here. So it has a category. So I have my category field. That would probably be a great one to convert over to Managed Metadata. So let's go ahead and paste the list, and let's go and transform that column. So I'm going to configure a transformation. So I'm going to choose my list column. Now I'm going to just choose the name field and category. And I'm going to put it into my handy quick takes group. Sure, I'll just put it into the product. Okay. All right, let's go ahead and run that. So this is actually, there's really handy here for converting stuff like choice fields and lookups, and using utilizing the managed metadata in 2010 and 2013 moving forward on your migration, so you can reconfigure it all on the fly. So now we have our category and it's perfect. So it's added the, so I might have wanted to create another term set, right? And then have all these things be added to the proper term set. But you see it added these and then it assigned it and it converted it over to managed metadata. So that's a really cool feature. And maybe just in the last few minutes, I'll just go over and back over those settings, because I know that they can be a little confusing as to when you actually want to choose them. So basically, we have these two fields are the most important: resolve the metadata by name and hierarchy, and copy the referenced managed metadata. So resolving by name and hierarchy means we look at the source name and we look at where it's located in the term store, as opposed to where we originally copied. We just found metadata and then we just looked for the term GUID pair and tried to add it to the target. That had a lot of issues attached to it, especially when a label exists on the target with a different GUID. So now we reference it, we resolve it, source and target, and then when this option is checked, we copy it, or we add it to the target if it doesn't exist. If you remove this option, we're assuming that the source and target have the exact same term and GUID pairs. So we're resolving them by name and hierarchy, but if we're not copying the reference managed metadata, we are expecting that the exact same term exists in the exact same location. And if it doesn't, or if it's a different GUID, we will throw that warning, right? So in most cases, if you're going from across different farms, you probably want to have this checked off, unless you may have taken the entire managed metadata content database and attached it to your target farm. And then, of course, this option here, the mapping the term stores, is used if you have multiple term stores and your site collection, for instance, uses a specific one on the source, which really doesn't really matter because we'll just pick it, we'll find managed metadata and we'll look it up, right? But it's really for target. When your target term store has multiple service applications, it will, if you don't map them, it will just choose the first one in the list it finds. In my case, when I set this up, it copied everything to this Summit managed metadata because it was sort of first in the list when we fetched them from the target. So those are basically those three options. I hope that explanation, I hope that's clear enough. I know that it sometimes takes a little bit to get familiar and used to the options. But I hope that this has helped everybody. It looks like we are out of time. So thank you all for jumping in, and we'll see you in a couple weeks for the next one.